Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Martirana, and I am from the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Welcome to today's webinar, Finding the Right Interventions, Implementing to a High Level. First of all, I'd like to share some brief details about today's webinar. Our presenters are Johan Liljengren and Lori Takawira. Johan leads work on early warning systems as part of the Talent Development Secondary Project and at the Everyone Graduates Center, both at Johns Hopkins University, and works with a team of individuals supporting EWS implementation across the country and regularly presents at school, district, state, and the national level on key strategies for EWS implementation. Lori is part of Talent Development Secondary at Johns Hopkins University and works with Clinton Middle School and Tulsa Public Schools. Lori has been the lead staff person on the implementation of early warning systems at her school for the last 2 years. Today's webinar will last approximately 60 minutes with time for questions. We'll be placing everyone on mute, and we ask that you do not unmute yourself, but instead refer to the chat function at the top of the screen if you have questions. Please feel free to log your questions as the presenters are talking, and we'll leave some time at the end to answer them. If we do not have enough time to get through all of the questions, we will reply to all participants by email within the next 5 to 7 days. We encourage you to ask questions or simply share a comment. Today's webinar is one of a number being offered by the Technical Assistance Center during 2017. The center is new, and it is funded by the Department of Education, specifically the Office of Safe and Healthy Students. Our website is currently being developed, and we hope to have it up and running soon. Before I hand this over to Johan, I wanted to share with you the mission of our National Center. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. And with that being said, Johan, I turn this over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amanda, for the intro on the session, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm going to share just a couple of things about the National Center, and then we'll dig into the content for today's call. So we have two different sides to the National Center of things that we're working on. One is really focused around an initiative that was started a couple of years ago called the under the My Brothers Keeper Success Mentors Support Network. So it's a continuation of that work using mentors to address chronic absenteeism. So there are 30 cities involved in that, and we're trying to continue that work and learn and spread the practices from that. We also have work focused on early warning systems. And it obviously includes chronic absenteeism as one of our indicators that we want to pay attention to and respond to. And we have a little bit broader focus, but trying to share practices about early warning systems, share strategies and ideas that schools, districts, and states can use in school improvement efforts. As Amanda shared, our website is still in process. So we have a temporary site where we're trying to keep up to date with with some of our information on it. So feel free to join to log into that site, keep up to date on our webinars, make sure you're on our mailing list, things like that. And then a couple of things that I just mentioned. If folks are interested, we are recruiting sites for site visits. So districts and states can apply for this. If you're at a school, we'll ask you to connect with someone at your district to apply. And we're able to offer these free of charge 1 to 2 day site visits to help schools with implementation of early warning systems and addressing any of the indicators. We have more resources to support around chronic absenteeism, but really could be any of those. So please reach out to us if you're interested in those. We're taking applications. We're trying to identify the schools school districts and states that will be doing those visits too. Yeah, you can email Veronica Buckwalter, who's our co-director. You can email her directly, and if you have questions on those. So please reach out if you're interested or in the process of recruiting folks. So, all right. So we'll jump into the content for today's call, and I'm going to do a little bit of an intro of I'll do a really quick intro on kind of refresher on early warning systems, and I'm going to introduce this idea of the intervention review. And it's a strategy we've seen a lot of schools take on as they're trying to figure out what to do with interventions. Lori is going to share her experience. They've been doing this. They've been working on early warning systems at the school she's working at in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's going to share a little bit about her experience and what they found through doing this intervention review process. and then we'll do a little follow-up at the end and have time for questions and discussion. So the way we viewed early warning systems is really is two sides to this. And a lot of times we hear about early warning systems, we hear about the indicator side. So we need reliable, valid indicators of that are predictive of when students are falling off track, when they might be at risk of disengaging and eventually dropping out. And we need that information to be helpful for school staff members, for school partners, to do something about it, to respond. And we need systems that make that data easily accessible, ready to use, etc. But what we've really tried to push is that, if we don't talk about the intervention system combined with that indicator system, that we're selling ourselves short and we're only going to have half the puzzle. So we have, really advocating that we pair this with this multi-tiered approach or multi-level approach to interventions that does preventative work as well as intervention and response when there are red flags. So we'll talk a little bit about both sides of that. So for today's call, what we're trying to, I'm going to take you through kind of, three big questions that we started asking. So, with early warning systems, there's a lot of work, again, as I said, on data systems. So how do we create a data system that, flags students, that, shows trends in which direction they're going, helps us figure these things out. But the very quick question that many folks have is so what? So what do you do about it? Once I know I have 8 kids with a red flag, I have 15 kids with a yellow flag, what do I do? What's the best intervention? So I'm going to share a couple of resources just like that are kind of background if you're doing research about trying to find better interventions for your school or district or state. So what evidence of impact is out there? What's available? And that's a process, obviously, of matching to what you need at in your situation. But then I really want to spend most of the time today talking about is how do we think about monitoring those types of interventions. And there's actually a lot of work around this that many interventions, when we really do in-depth study and research on these, many of them fall short in implementation. And there's a variety of reasons why. Sometimes it's too challenging. Sometimes it's we didn't have the setup correct. There's a lot goes into that. But are we doing those interventions as intended, as designed, and ultimately are kids making progress? When we have them connected to that. So a couple of things we'll share on this idea of how does a school or district monitor this in a better way, try to get better information back in a more timely manner. So like I said, kind of three different things about this is really step one of getting started. How do we find the right information? So there's a lot of information that you need to know about what your situation is. What staffing budget do you have available that could be used towards interventions or supports or programs? Do you have expertise in your school or community that's already there? Do you have a special education teacher who's certified in math and special education who would be the perfect fit to do a small group math intervention class? What expertise is there already that you don't need to look outside for? Obviously, what are your ABC data? What is your ABC data showing you, and in terms of your need? And then there's a variety of other things that might be showing up in that. So I think that's kind of step one in finding the right information. Is what are those needs? What restrictions do you have, and what you could purchase if you needed to buy something, or if you had to train a new person in something. What restrictions do you have? We want to look at compiled research and evidence, and I'll share a couple of places that are working to try to do some of this work for you in terms of that. It's a complicated thing, and sometimes and we don't want to have middle school principals having to read every research study done on these. So we're trying to, how do we compile this information? How do we make it easier, more accessible? And there's tons of questions as you're looking at those types of programs about, how they match to what you have, what you need. And then lastly, you're going to have to do some adapting. You're going to have to design or adapt to your context. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't move too far away from the design of that program when, the results might be different if we don't implement it as designed. So how do we, make sure it works with the local context, but that we don't give up key pieces of that work? So a couple of different sites that we recommend, and these are really resources that are compiling things for you. So the What Works Clearinghouse is run through the U.S. Department of Education, tries to summarize research evidence on programs and interventions, and shows what level of evidence those interventions have. So what have we found? Is there strong evidence that this program is effective? Is there, there are a couple of different levels of evidence that you'll see from the What Works Clearinghouse. The regional educational labs also run through the U.S. Department of Education, and I put the map on there of what regions there are. So you can see each of those different colors has a regional educational laboratory for those states. And really their role is trying to help folks, help research in those topics in those that matter to those states, but also sharing that across those areas. So how do you, things that are particularly important to like the folks or the green states right in the middle there, there's a fair amount of rural school districts in that area of the country. So how do we do research on things that matter to those rural schools, and how do we share practices that matter to those? So great resource, things particular to your type of districts or type of areas. So good information there. The Middle School Matters Institute, this is run out of the University of Texas, focused more on practices than on programs, but has worked to summarize research and looked at what are the strategies for reading that really we've seen over and over again through research that have an impact. So more focused on practices than programs, which has some, you have to navigate. It's just a little bit different frame for that. And then lastly, a newer one with the Every Student Succeeds Act. There's a new website, Evidence for ESSA, that is available, and I'll show you a snapshot from that. Again, trying to compile information about programs and their effectiveness. So this is just a snapshot. This is not a program necessarily. We're not endorsing one program or the other. I just did a snapshot so you could see what type of information. This is from Evidence for ESSA. So they'll give you, here's the name of the program, here's what its rating is based on the research we've reviewed. There's one study that was done on it, this many students, here's the effect size, and then it has the background information. There's cost to this program, so you'd have to decide, does this program work for you or is this not the right program? So this is just a snapshot, but for each of the programs that are on there, you get some background information and can help you make a decision on if this is the right approach for you or for your district or school. So, but again, a good compilation of information, I think, enables you to make some decisions about what makes the most sense. And then one other thing I'll share in kind of the background of for evidence base and looking for effectiveness of interventions. So in the Every Student Succeeds Act, there is specific language around including evidence-based practices in school improvement efforts. And they put some definitions in there. They don't define everything, but they put some definitions in the Every Student Succeeds Act. So if you want to look, there's some non-regulatory guidance that the U.S. Department of Ed has put out at that link below, and we'll, I know it's a little small, so we'll make sure that it's a part of our follow-up, so you can look more in depth if you want to. But they provide some definitions on this, and so here's the first three levels of it. So there's, when you're looking at programs that are effective, so strong, moderate, and promising. And so you can see the different levels of what this actually means. So the most rigorous is well-implemented experimental design. So basically you're looking at, the easiest way to think of it is it's a random assignment of students. So you have two groups of students. One group of students gets your math intervention, the other student does not. They're assigned randomly. And we look at how those two groups of students did against each other. So it's very rigorous. They're the most time-intensive and challenging to complete. You need two very similar groups to do your research. And they usually take time because you want to see how, if that has impact. So, and that moves down, and you can see the different levels. So there's promising ones that there seems to be some correlations between students who took a course or took a part in an intervention and seem to be making progress. And so there seems to be some correlation. We're not able to decipher what exactly it's from, so we can't make the same assumptions on it. So that they are you're really showing, obviously we want things as strong as we can, but in some cases we don't have evidence of that. How do we move down slightly to the next level? So these are written into the Every Student Succeeds Act. So there's really a push to use evidence in school improvement efforts, and I think use interventions and supports that are a part of this. The last category that they have is called under evaluation. And this one is it's based on evidence. There seems to be research that it could be an effective or impactful program, and that we're in the process of seeing if that is the case, that it's likely to improve student outcomes. So it's kind of this one that it's like the promising practices. So it's based on high quality research, but it doesn't have that study that falls under the other categories. So those ones, as you're looking at different studies or different interventions, there is a level of support. Within ESSA, different states will roll this out in different ways. So some states might hold more tightly to these definitions than others. Some states might allow you to use any 4 of those if you're applying for money for school improvement. So that will vary by state. That's really the state's decision to make on how they do that part of it. So. All right, so I know that went a little long, but I just wanted to give that as background. I think that's an important first step in thinking about what are we looking for. How do we find interventions or find information on good interventions? We're going to shift a little bit and think about, are we really implementing these as designed and seeing impact? So we have set up a process with a number of schools to try to look at this. And part of this is reliant on the information that you collect about the data, about the things you're doing in your school. And so we tried to collect information and set up systems to collect information that figured out, what are the common barriers that were being talked about during the year? What are the biggest areas of need? When things happen, what were our most common responses to that? So kind of a process of moving deeper and deeper into this. Once we figured that out, was there, or did we have big gaps? Were we seeing that attendance was actually our biggest need, but our best response was a behavior, kind of behavior modification or behavior approach? So were we seeing mismatches between what we have available and what needs were? And then lastly, which is our ultimate question in this, are we seeing effectiveness? Are we seeing kids who go to one program seem to do better or respond to those than others? So in some ways, it's taking that evidence approach that I shared earlier and trying to do it at the school level. So we know it's not going to be the same rigorous, evaluation, but we've seen a lot of schools take this approach and be able to do some of their own kind of immediate feedback and immediate, and they can shift and they can make decisions a little bit quicker. So what does this entail? So a lot of schools have set up some kind of, we've called them EWI or early warning indicator meetings, but some people have called them other data review meetings, staying on track meetings. I mean, there's a lot of different names. But basically, think of a group of staff members who are meeting about students and trying to decide on an approach to respond to them. So we have people taking this kind of notes from that meeting. So we talked about Jonathan. He's having a conflict with Abby. We moved his seat, and we're also going to connect him to the after-school club. So we have some notes like this. We know when a check-in date. We know what intervention we are going to try. We're collecting information that way. There's different versions of this. Obviously, you could imagine a lot of different ways to do that. This one is a little bit more structured, but it is so there are a couple of interventions, so you can see the interventions that have been tried, who the point person or champion is for those, and beginning and end dates. So it's a little bit more structured setup for this one, but the same idea. We're meeting about a student. We decided on a plan for them. How do we keep track of that information? We've seen some schools, this is an example, have used different types of Google documents. So a couple school districts that actually use this as one of their tools. So, but there's this is a Google form basically that they filled out for each meeting, and we're able to keep track of things that way. So another example, this one you could use the Google spreadsheets or the Google forms. Some folks have used other spreadsheet documents or other Word documents to keep track of kind of those data meeting notes or intervention meeting notes. The whole idea for this, and if you can do it in a spreadsheet, I think it makes it work so much better, is that you have the ability to sort and filter and create charts and tables periodically. So after 3 months of the school year, I can make a little chart like what you see on the screen there, and I know who that AmeriCorps or the counselor is the person that has is most frequently doing this. So I really recommend folks try to figure out some type of spreadsheet tool to do this. There's a bunch of different ones out there that you can use, but it provides a good framework for analysis later on. So the second one is kind of an intervention overview, and we've seen schools again create tables or spreadsheets. Do this, and they have, so if you have your students kind of along the left-hand column, and then just a yes or no about what interventions that student is receiving. So Doug's a part of reading, not a part of after-school homework. He's on the counselor's caseload, and he does not have a parent as part of the PTA. Sam, not for reading, yes for after-school, counselor's caseload, and yes, a parent's on PTA. So again, it's a little bit different framework for it, but it's kind of this master document that keeps track of which students are in which places. Again, trying to, one, just for monitoring this, but it also helps us if we do organize tables or spreadsheets, we're in a better position at the end to do a review. This is another version of it, but it combines it with some of the data. So in this case, we actually pulled the data from the student information system. So that's our pink column there. You can see that in the pink column they had the student's average daily attendance and then a checklist of what interventions they were getting for attendance. So this was part of a review. It wasn't done every day, but trying to help keep track of that. And then again, enables us to look at some different things and see if we've made, see what analysis we can do kind of at the quarter to see if there's progress for different things. And then lastly, and this one is really about implementation of interventions, is do we have our kids actually making use of them? So here's Doug. He's going to the reading intervention, but he was only there 2 of 10 times in September. So our response to that it's probably not that the reading intervention doesn't work. It's that we need to get Doug to show up to the reading intervention. So our response is going to be different. Much better attendance October, November. Then we might be able to feel like, hey, are we seeing Doug make progress in this intervention? Is this a good use of our resources and in trying to help Doug make progress? So these are the three kind of, I'll go back to these. 3 different intervention documentation kind of spaces, EWI meetings, intervention overviews, and intervention attendance. I think all 3 can be valuable. And when we do those different kinds of things, I think it helps us to do better analysis and better review on the other end of it. So I'm gonna pass it over to Lori to talk us through a little bit about how they've actually used this. So we'll hear from her about a little background about the school she's been working at Clinton Middle School. And then how they have used some of this intervention review data to shift and make some changes. And then I'll share a couple of other ones that we've compiled from other schools that have done this as well as a way to make intermediate changes and adjustments that make best use of our interventions and help us figure out what we can do differently. So, Lori, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, thank you, Johan. I appreciate it. I'm Lori Takawira, and I'm the School Transformation Facilitator at Clinton Middle School in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to start out by sharing some of the context of our school. So Clinton Middle School has been a 6th through 8th grade level school for the last 2 years. Prior to that, we were grades 7 through 8th grade. You can move to the next slide, Johan, if you're able to. Perfect. Prior to 2015-2016 school year, we were just 7th through 8th grade for the previous years. We did have 360 students last year. We have a pretty diverse student population. We do have a little under a third of our students are served on individual education plans for special education. 10% of our students are gifted and talented, and 6% of our students are English language learners. And then for the last 3.5 years, we have been a full Diplomas Now school. If you want to move to the next slide, Johan. Thank you. We have been a full Diplomas Now school. In 2013, we had City Year and Talent Development for the first semester, and then Communities and Schools joined in January of 2014. So that's why we were just for 3.5 years that we've had Diplomas Now there. And looking at the screen, you can see the information there. We've had student ambassadors for the last 3 years. We've done Finishing Strong for the last 4 years with report card conferences to help support our students. And that's when we had community members and volunteers come in and meet with every single student in the school. They do 5-minute conferences with those students, and they review over their progress reports, so their grades basically. And then there's some questions that we've implemented around attendance and behavior as well to help our students reflect and just be able to be proactive with their own learning and to set goals so that they can finish the semester strong or finish the year strong. And then we've also had the early warning system for the last 4 years and implemented talent development curriculum for the last 3 to 4 years. So with the intervention review, what we have done is at the end of each year, we compile the data, something similar to what you're seeing on your screen. This is for the last 3 years, but we've done it yearly. And we have our teacher teams, our grade level teams, look at this data and reflect on questions similar to what Johan mentioned earlier about what are the successes, what are the challenges, which intervention do we see that we've used the most, which one was most successful, which ones are we maybe not utilizing. So looking at this data here, what we discovered from this chart is that the number one thing that we used most significantly was through our advisory support. And to give you a little background on that, the first 3 years that Diplomas Now was there, so that would be 2013 to 2016, we had what we called the ZAP program, which is Zeros Are Not Permitted. So teachers in the advisory class were helping their students to complete assignments and to master skills that they possibly had not mastered. And so that's why there's a larger influx on advisory support. This last year, unfortunately, we did not have that program, and so teachers still supported students with academics through that, but not as significantly as the years prior to. And then the second one that we saw that we utilized the most was parent contact, and we found this to be extremely effective for parents who wanted to be involved and for students who were, influenced by their parents to do better in school. With some, we found it was not as effective if the parent was not as involved and if it did not affect the student in the same way as it would for a student who is concerned about their parents' influence. And then the next one that we saw was the one-on-one conferences and check-ins. I'm going to reference those together because sometimes they were used interchangeably during our EWS meetings. So the one-on-one conference is when a teacher would have, or whoever was championing that student would have a conversation with the student around attendance, behavior, course performance, to ask them, how they're doing, or to set goals with them, or to check up with them on the goal that they had set so that they can help encourage them to meet that goal. And then the check-ins were very similar to the one-on-one conference. I will say this last year, so 2016, 2017, we did implement attendance mentors and behavior mentors. So we took the list of our chronically absent students and we posted that for our staff, all of our staff, not just our teachers and administration, but everyone in the school, including the custodian, the office aides, everyone who interacted with the students, because many of our students are influenced by other adults in our school besides their teachers. And so if anyone in our school had a relationship with those students that were on that chronic absentee list, then we asked them, if you're already checking in with them, if you're already encouraging them, could you please put your name beside their name so that we're aware of that? And so there were multiple conversations around, attendance and behavior as well, because we did the same for behavior. We looked at the referrals, the data on the referrals, and those students who had, a certain amount of referrals were put on that list. So that was somewhat effective, maybe not as effective as what we would have liked it to be, but we did see growth in many of our students with attendance and behavior for those ones that checked in with them. Some of our staff members actually took it to a whole other level, and they would do incentives for those students, like say if they were missing, they were coming one day out of the week, the goal might be, okay, this week we want you to come 3 days out of the week. If you make it 3 days, then this is what your incentive will be. And that was determined by the mentor that was working with that student. And we did see improvement with our students. And then the next one after the one-on-one conferences and check-ins was makeup work and tutoring. And those were the top 6 from the last 3 years. So what we discovered is that within those top 6, the majority of them touched on course performance. Some of them touched on behavior, and some of them touched on attendance. So we talked about how can we differentiate our interventions and be creative with that, and then also be more intentional with possibly the one-on-one conferences or the check-ins. Prior to this last year, we had been implementing restorative practices, restorative conversations and conferences very frequently and with fidelity. This last year, due to scheduling and the loss of school personnel, that was more of a challenge. And when we reflected at the end of the year, one of the most common comments that was made is that for our area of growth, we need to find a way to continue implementing restorative practices, restorative conversations, and restorative conferences, because it does help our students significantly. So those were kind of the findings that we had found when we looked at what interventions are most common, which ones were more successful, which ones did we have more of a challenge with. Okay, you can go to the next one, Johan. Thank you. So this slide shows who were our most common champions. And I will say I started working with Clinton Middle School 2 years ago, so I was not here for the first 2 years. But I do know from the data that I looked at that there was a bit of a challenge in getting the teachers and the staff to champion the students more frequently than they have in the last couple of years, and that is probably because, number one, Diplomas Now is new to the school, so it's just, we were just starting the process. But I will say that for the last 2 years, and if you look at that, teachers championing is the highest, number on there. for those that championed our students, that we made significant improvements. Prior to that, it was City Year and, communities and schools. Talent development took on some, but not as many, because City Year and communities and schools have actual focus lists that they actually work with students specifically under attendance, behavior, and course performance. And so many times they would champion those students that they had on those focus lists. But within the last couple of years, the teachers really took on ownership. And so as we know that in any organization or school, that when we're wanting to build capacity and sustainability, it's important that we have the individuals who are actually working within the school take the ownership. And so that was an encouraging thing to see. Also, you'll notice that the social worker, there's not, it's a very, low percent there. We actually lost our social worker and one counselor last year coming into this year, and so that kind of but it was very challenging, to say the least. And so this year, the teachers really picked up the slack on that and took on a lot more of that. Additionally, what we found is that if there was a coach that was connected to a student with sports or even band, the band instructor, the kids loved band and jazz band, if we could utilize them as a champion, it really helped those students to improve, because they were encouraging them not just in their academics, but also when they were on the field, whether it be sports or in band. So that's something that we realized that, it would be good to really leverage that support more frequently if we can, if there's students that are, actively involved in sports and band or any extracurricular activity, really, because those teachers and those coaches have, usually have a good relationship with them and a different kind of relationship. So I think that's pretty much it. Johan, if you have anything else that you want to add, questions?
Sure. I just had one question on it, and then I have a few more slides, and we'll get to questions if there are others from the group. I'm just curious if there's anything you stopped doing because of the review, either interventions or, I know you talked about a couple that you wanted to do more of, but anything that you guys ended up saying, hey, this is not worth our time, or not, at least the way we're doing it's not worth our time. Anything you guys stopped?
I'm trying to think of if there was anything we stopped. I mean, not necessarily. I don't think because of that it wasn't working so much. I think, obviously we stopped the ZAP because that was not a part of the schedule anymore. I do know that staffing, so on the previous slide when it listed staffings, those were usually conferences with parents. And I know that sometimes when teachers would have those conferences with the parents, and once again, it depends on the parent and, their response to that. They sometimes felt it effective and they sometimes did not find it effective. So if it was for a certain student, one of the teachers would say, hey, why don't we do a staffing on this student? The comment might have been made, well, we tried that and there hasn't been much progress made. So they'd take it off the table maybe for an individual student. But as far as something that we stopped altogether, I don't recall that, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I think our biggest thing at our school was leveraging those people that we know are connected to those students, that have a good relationship, that can really encourage those students, help those students set goals and work towards those goals to meet them and help them be successful. And then also coming up with, unconventional ways that we can implement interventions. Because I think that we realized when we looked at some of the data that we kind of had go-to interventions. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a good choice, to do that. It's just that I think that we realized that, hey, we could be more creative with this if we wanted to.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Well, I will share a few more things, other analysis samples that I have, and then we'll get to a couple of questions at the end. So I think you heard from Lori that, as schools have done this, it's interesting to hear kind of how they've responded to it. Some of them, in hers, they're the charts she shared were actually just in the, are we assigning the right interventions? Are we overutilizing some folks? Are we not engaging others? So kind of that way. I'm going to share a couple of things that I've seen schools do. So some of these, as similar to what Lori shared, is kind of most common interventions. So, is data skewed one way or the other? Is there a gap in certain things? And then there's some, so you can see a chart like this where, we have the majority of our interventions being assigned, so about half of the interventions, so not quite a majority, being assigned to one group, so AmeriCorps members that were so volunteers that are in the school. So a pretty large number, and actually City Year, which is the gray, is another AmeriCorps program. So actually you're looking at 3/4 of the interventions for attendance were for that. So in this case, it was overutilizing some of those and underutilizing some other ones. So this was a quarterly check, basically, to see are we in the right spot? Are we making good use of what we have available? So some different versions of this. These are from 2 different schools. What are the types of interventions? So the purple chart along the left-hand side, you can see there's home contact, referrals, makeup work, just teacher monitoring it, behavior plans, all different kinds of things. Again, trying to just see are we making use of the interventions that we have? Are we over or underutilizing different things? Same question on the right-hand side, just a different way to look at it. But all fairly easy to pull together if you've been collecting data throughout the quarter. The gap analysis one, and I've seen most schools do this in some kind of a spreadsheet. So either online spreadsheet, like a Google Documents spreadsheet, or an Excel, Microsoft Excel, or other spreadsheet. But if you are able to filter or look at different things, you can tell. So in this one, these are our it looks kind of pinkish on the screen, but these are our red flag attendance students. So anybody with less than 90% attendance was flagged in this spreadsheet. Every one of these students should have some attendance intervention. So this one we have student AC, the third line, doesn't actually have an attendance intervention. So this helps us, respond. How do we connect? Who is student AC? Who is student Y? Let's figure out what they need. We've missed some things there. So that's the gap. So seen schools use kind of a spreadsheet to do that gap analysis and be able to respond and make those changes quicker. The last one, I think, what we always want to know is whether or not we're having impact. This one is harder to know the cause of it, especially as we're doing kind of rapid feedback. So it is harder to know. We're not going to have the strong evidence like I shared earlier in from the research studies that we get. But I think we can start to get some feedback on whether or not we're seeing any progress and can help us make changes. So I've seen schools do this in a couple of different ways. So one of the big ones around attendance is targeting specific days of the year. So, and this is a fairly common one we've seen. The day before Thanksgiving, the day before, this one is the 2 days before winter break, oftentimes tough times of the year for attendance. So if we know they're going to be tough, let's plan for it. Let's do something specific or unique that day, and try to make sure that we go all the way to the end of that break. So, and this one, basically, they were doing a lot of initiatives in the 15-16 year, and they were comparing back to the year before. Okay, when we put a lot of energy into that, tried to make November 20, whatever, the day before Thanksgiving, an important day, do we actually see a change in attendance? So this one they saw yes for the November one, no for the 1st December one, and yes for the 2nd December. So again, help them in their reflection. We're putting a lot of effort and work into this? Are we seeing changes in that? So that's one way we've seen it kind of with whole school initiatives. Same idea, whole school initiatives. We're trying to do campaigns to recognize 100% attendance and most improved attendance. Let's track it throughout the year. Are we actually seeing differences that we're making more progress in 100% attendance, or might it be influenced by other things? So in this chart, the school that this is, April was when they had testing, and they put a huge emphasis on attendance, and it was their best month of the year. So in this one, they actually found out, yeah, our campaigns might be good, but when it really mattered, when we needed all the kids to be there, we put a lot of energy into it, and the kids knew it was important, and they were there. So they didn't learn what they thought they were going to, but they were able to learn something from that. So again, similar idea. We're doing weekly recognitions. We're doing a competition between different cohorts of kids. Are we seeing progress throughout the year? The competitions can be really good. People can, you have a team. You're working on something together. They can be challenging because of variations in grade levels. So you don't want one grade level to be winning the whole year. Then the competition is really not driving anyone to improve. So have to be careful in some ways how we use those. But again, same question: did we actually see anything? We're putting a lot of energy and time into this. Are we seeing results from it? So, and then lastly, and this again, like I said, this is the most challenging to know if it's the intervention that is causing the progress. But this one I've seen done again in big spreadsheets, but you can sort it. So in this one, we could look at all of the kids who are getting a student mentor from attendance, and we could see what their attendance was quarter one, what their attendance is quarter three. Did we see progress during that time when they had a student mentor? Again, it's not going to tell us everything that it's for sure that student mentor, but again, we want to be looking at both sides of that. If nothing else, it's the student mentor should be working on that. If it stayed the same or didn't go down, the student mentor would be trying to address that with them. So this is another one I've seen done through spreadsheets. You can do that. And then this is a summary one. This is a table that a school presented, kind of their review presenting. We did home visits. We assigned 23 kids, to home visits throughout the first half of the year. And 12 of those kids, so basically half of the kids we assigned, made progress doing that. We assigned 57 kids attendance mentors for attendance. 32 of 57 improved home visits and a mentor. So there's the cases that needed more. So the bigger group that needed more actually seemed to have, be really helpful for that group. Most of them, so that most intensive work improved. So I think, this is trying to do some of this analysis, this compilation at the end of a quarter, and end of year. So, so the last thing on it is there's a lot of different things that you can figure out by doing this type of review. I think it's really set up by a good intervention tracking or monitoring system. So how do you keep track of that for meetings? How do you keep track of it overall across your school? And when you do a good job of the setup, I think the analysis is that much easier. And you can go as deep in the analysis as you have time. So if you have, is it just gap analysis and trends? That's all you're able to do. Could you go deeper and try to analyze these whole school initiatives or preventative work? Obviously, the ultimate question, but also the most time-consuming is the individual impact one. So I think if you get the good setup, you can go as deep as you have time to dig into it and work on it. So, all right. So we kind of walked through this process of, are we using the right interventions? Do we have this, this evidence of impact? Do they meet the need? That question I started with. And then the second parts of it, are we doing these as designed? Are we actually implementing what we set out to do? and are kids making progress? Are we actually having an impact with what we're doing? Are we seeing things change in our data based on our actions? All right. So we dug in today more into the interventions side of it, thinking about these, but obviously, we're pairing these things back and forth. So we have to be looking at those interventions and coming back to, are we seeing impact in that data? So, we see early warning systems as this double-sided, both sides of this, and this is, I think, is a pretty good example of how when we can get them to interact together, that's when we can really tell if we're having an impact on students and the students' outcomes. So I'm going to pause there and pass it back to I'll pass it back to Amanda, and we'll have time if you have questions